Welcome to the Mind Frame podcast, where we discuss all things mindset. My name is Tara, and in each episode, I sit down with experts in psychology and neuroscience, as well as individuals who have achieved the extraordinary in the world of business, sports, and beyond. My aim with each episode is to uncover insight into how our minds work and how our thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes shape our experiences and performance. With that being said, let's get into today's episode.
So the moment I was over the Hillary step, I knew I was going to do it. So I was sobbing into my oxygen mask the whole way up. I had about a 40-minute ridge, like you go along the knife ridge. So I was sobbing. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make my dad so proud. So I get to the top. And I mean, it's amazing. You can see the curvature of the earth. I mean, it's, people often ask, it's probably about the size of here with prayer flags. I was super focused. I mean, it was like I was in another mind frame. I wanted to get to the summit.
I'm so excited to welcome Annabelle Bond to this episode. Annabelle has been referred to as the fastest female climber in the world. She summited the 7 highest peaks across the 7 continents, all under 1 year. These included Mount Everest on the China-Nepal border, Elbrus in Russia, Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, Kosciuszko in Australia, Vincent Massif in Antarctica, Aconcagua in Argentina, and finally Denali in Alaska. She was once afraid of heights, yet Annabelle went on to become the first woman in the world to achieve this incredible feat. Please welcome a real-life Bond girl to the podcast, Annabelle Bond. I'd love to start hearing about your journey, and maybe if we could start with your upbringing. Where did you live? What did you enjoy doing? Who was Annabelle before you were the fastest female climber in the world?
Okay, so Annabelle was a real geek. No, Annabelle, so I was born in Singapore, and I spent my life growing up in Asia. So Hong Kong, Indonesia, Singapore, and then back to Hong Kong for a big stint of time before we embarked on the US. But if I just talk about, so I'm a bit of a cross between 2 cultures. So I'm very, very embedded in Asia, but obviously I have my British roots too. And I'm just so happy I got to experience time in Asia back then, different cultures. I learned so much visually. And of course, the East is a very exciting part of the world right now.
Definitely. And you still live in Hong Kong?
Still based in Hong Kong. Okay. We're all over the place at the moment. Yeah. Izzy's at school in England, but Hong Kong is base.
And so when you were younger, I believe you spent the majority of your time in Indonesia and Hong Kong?
Yep. So Indonesia was, pretty amazing. You've got to imagine Jakarta. I'm a little old. Jakarta in the 70s. And that volcano, Krakatau, we had a beach house down there where we learned to surf. And I used to go horseback riding in the Punjak and, just galloping around I was 6 to 8. I was galloping around the tea plantations. And my sister was only about 3 and sort of on the horses too. So we lived a very free life, no riding helmets, none of the safety precautions of today. It was free and I played around in the paddy fields, no phones. So very basic, but amazing childhood there.
Definitely. That's amazing. So was that kind of where your love for the outdoors came from? You were very comfortable in the outdoors, it sounds like.
I think every day was sports. I learned to swim and run, and my whole life revolved around sport at an early age, albeit fun. Yeah. So I was mad. I did horse riding, I did surfing, I did swimming. And actually, my parents wanted us all to be proficient at the social sports. And he kind of queried that, but then thinking about it, we all had to be proficient at swimming, tennis, horseback riding, skiing, sailing, and golf.
That's
so
amazing.
I can't say I appreciated sailing lessons on the Norfolk Broads in England in minus whatever degrees with Captain Anthill, who was about 100. So sailing, probably I left that alone.
Sure.
But actually, in hindsight, it's a great gift to give your kids because you can really get involved in so much.
Definitely. And you've talked a lot about the importance of grit and the importance of competition. How did that come out in your early childhood? Was there someone in your family that really ingrained that in you?
No, not really. But I just think when we grew up, it was a lot tougher than I can see from my daughter today. The schools were really strict. I mean, I got spanked at school. I got hit with a slipper. So grit, I don't think it's something. I think it's something that it's already within you, and it's a product of your environment. I was always very competitive, but that was just because healthy competition is something that I think is really important. And I notice it's not really around today, but it was a huge part of my youth.
And I believe your grandmother was a climber. She influenced you early on, or that kind of came later?
No, she was always an inspiration. I remember looking at pictures of her on little pulleys going across river crossings in Nepal. Wow. I mean, this is like 1929, and women didn't really do that. She went off on her own as a doctor on an expedition. So was she climbing? No, but she was up at altitude. Right. And I have these amazing pictures. I mean, she had she got given a snow leopard as a token, from the locals. And in my mind, she's always a pioneer of adventure travel and exploration and an asset to women, quite frankly.
Definitely. It seems that you both really paved a way for women in that world. So
I think she had it a little tougher than me. Her outfits were far more basic.
Okay.
Yeah. Gore-Tex wasn't around then.
Sure. Yeah. No shades of pink probably back then.
No.
And maybe a good time to also just touch on your father was also, he's now the ex-chairman of HSBC. Was he kind of hard on you, pushing you? What was that dynamic like?
So Dad's been a huge inspiration in my life. We had the traditional upbringing of where my father worked. My mum was very much looking after us at home. So yeah, my dad's work ethic. It's interesting. His path to Asia, just briefly, his parents couldn't afford to send him to Oxford, so he got a scholarship and he ended up going to California to a school in Santa Barbara where he thought he'd died and gone to heaven. And when his year was up, he knew that he never wanted to live in England again. So he took the first job that got him outside of the UK, and that was to Hong Kong, because you could work there as a British citizen. And he literally started mailing out checks. He was in charge of current accounts in Hong Kong. And then he sort of got separated from the crowd when he took his banking exams and he came top in the world in his category. So that led him, and he worked his way up the bank from the very bottom to the top. And I think that's always really impressive his whole life. And he was very much in the wings. He was working all the time. So my mum was hands-on with all of us. But when he was angry, if we were naughty, because I often was, he had this stare that was, ask anyone that worked at HSBC, it was really scary. He didn't even need to say anything. So he was there if I was overstepped the mark. So he happened to show up a few times for that.
And you, I believe, so later in life, you're living in London. He brought you back, I believe, to Hong Kong to
Yes, you got to remember, I went to boarding school at 8, and in those days, Hong Kong, London was 4 stops on the plane. I went on my own. I can't imagine having sent my daughter for 4 stops at 8. And I remember the plane broke down in those days, it was called Calcutta. So I was on my own in a hotel age 8 as an unaccompanied minor. So, already I think that grit and independence was building, from that. I didn't see my parents for the entire term, 3 months. I went to grandparents for exeat. So boarding school, I was between Hong Kong and London, so very, very transient. I loved Hong Kong for the holidays. England was always school time. Okay. And then I was very naughty at school.
Okay.
And actually, if you asked me what one of my big regrets in life, it was not working harder in school. To everyone out there, work hard in school. It really, I happened to take a different path, but it's an important part of your life. And I was so naughty. And so when I finished school, I was tooling around in London. I was working for a concert promoter. And I was kind of sort of in no man's land. And my dad's like, right, get back to work in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And I moved to Hong Kong and I started a career in real estate.
Okay, and you at Savills?
It was called First Pacific Davis.
Okay.
I was there and it became Savills. I was there for 10 years. And actually that's where my real competitive juices came in, because we were all commission based. And this girl showed up in the office and she was just billing everything. And suddenly I'm like, okay, so I was up against her.
Okay.
And that's when I really started being competitive and working.
Interesting. So you had that competitive drive growing up, but you really felt it come
Only
out
in sports.
Okay.
But then when it came, suddenly now we're talking about money, your career, your independence. So suddenly that kicked in.
Definitely.
So somewhere between the age of 21 and 24, I wanted to make money and I wanted to be successful.
And did you feel like real estate was your path, or you felt like something was missing even?
No, it was a means to an end. I had a great
Yeah.
life. I worked hard, played hard. Hong Kong has that kind of culture. And, all the big banks, I had them all as my clients. We had sort of global crossing. It was the start of the technology. So everyone was pouring into Asia. And it was a cycle between Hong Kong and Singapore, because Hong Kong would get really expensive. Then they would go to Singapore, and then they go back to Hong Kong. But, ultimately, Hong Kong is the gateway to China. So Hong Kong, I think, will always have that edge.
And during that time, I believe you had a boyfriend who got you into extreme running. Was that your kind of introduction into the extreme
I started
sports?
dating this guy from Goldman Sachs called Kip Nelson, who we're great friends today. So he won't mind me saying this. I mean, he was also very driven, and he was partaking in this race called the Maclehose Trail. I mean, it sounds sort of old and boring, but it was a 103-kilometer mountain marathon, 24,000 feet of vertical.
Wow.
It was brutal in pretty much 90% humidity, if you're lucky. And so if I wanted to see him, I kind of had to run. And because he was working Goldman Sachs hours, so he was 7 a.m. and he wouldn't come back till like 9 p.m, and that's if he wasn't traveling. So I started running, and then soon the deal was I could join their Maclehose team as long as I could keep up. So you're a team of 4 people, and you're as good as the slowest person. All 4 of you've got to start, and all 4 of you've got to finish.
Oh, interesting.
So major teamwork involved. So I just wanted to be at the front, because whenever there was a stop, if you're last, you don't have time to rest.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So if you're last, you come in and the whole team picks up and keeps going?
Yeah, because we're all ready to go. So like the poor
Definitely.
guy, or person that comes in last, arrives in and it's like, okay, we're off.
Okay.
So I always kept so I'd managed to juggle the real estate career. I could do a lot on the road. So I was running huge amounts. I was probably running, 10, 12 hours on the weekends, and maybe 3 a day in the week.
Wow, amazing. And that was specifically training for the Maclehose
For the
Trail?
Maclehose.
Okay, Maclehose.
Yeah, so I really credit Kip for taking me from social sports, where I was just competitive, into this whole other endurance sport, which is about overcoming pain and dealing with, how when your body is so tired, fighting through that pain threshold.
Definitely. So what did you start to learn during that time? I imagine really getting in tune with your body and what your limits were. And
yeah, your body's your engine. So I was fortunate enough that my mum back in Jakarta in the 70s was a health freak. Okay. So while everyone else is enjoying ice creams and Coca-Cola, I was having like cod liver oil malt and
what is that?
I never had a fizzy drink, and she was really, really healthy and fussy about what we ate. I never had chocolate or anything.
Interesting.
I really credit her, and looking back now, for, they say when up until you're 7, what you put into your body develops your organs for the rest of your life.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah. So I very much focused on what I ate. I would eat, and people would go for dinner with us, and I'd have mountains of pasta. As a woman, everyone's like looking at you going, what about the gluten?
Right.
But I was like, I couldn't eat enough to what I burnt. So very healthy. Teaches you a lot about people, teamwork. Everyone had to pull their weight. Everyone had to put in their own training, and we ran it like a military operation. So, because of the humidity, every other second or every other minute we had to drink.
Yeah.
And I also only drank mineral water. That was very early on, where I became really fastidious about water, and I was the only one that actually didn't blow up on the first one.
Blow up in what way?
Oh, because people would just, the heat, the humidity, just dehydrate, and then once you throw up and pass out, that's it.
Okay.
So no, we had only 2 Maclehoses we finished complete. 2, we had people go off to hospital at the end of section 3.
So you did 4.
I did 4.
Wow, amazing.
6 months a year training.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah, but it taught me so much in life. So I credit Kip for getting me into that whole endurance side of sports.
So you have this transition from kind of more recreational sports now to extreme sports. Where did the climbing start to fit in?
Okay, so in a nutshell, Kip and I got engaged, and I quit my job, he quit Goldman, and we moved to Sun Valley in Idaho. So we had this year because I had to travel because I wasn't an American. So we did a running holiday in Peru. So we ran the Inca Trail. It was my first time, we went to Nepal, and we trekked to Everest Base Camp, and we were so AAA, we raced each other. What's the fastest time anyone's done Kalapatar? We'd set our watches, and it would be like, okay, we'd race each other to the top.
Who would win? We don't have to reveal that.
Occasionally I would. My mum would be, just let him win. I'm like,
really?
No. But he was very strong.
Yeah.
And then we went and did Aconcagua, which was my first ever mountain.
Okay.
And I remember we took a guide from Jackson Hole, and we took a local guide, and we arrive in Mendoza, and Kip's like, oh, I'm doing a really technical route, you do the other one. And I'm like, so now it's climbing my first ever mountain. Now I'm going alone with so I said, okay.
So you did go separate routes.
No. So anyway, we had a huge fight. I said, okay, I'm taking the local guide. And he's like, so anyway, we ended up doing the same route.
Okay.
I learned a lot. We had altitude sick problems with one of the guides.
Oh, interesting.
The poor guy from the States, and Kip got high altitude pulmonary edema on the summit. So he was in a terrible state, despite being very strong.
And what is that?
It's altitude. It's an altitude thing. He was sort of delirious, and we had to give him a Dex shot. And he was super strong. I think it's because he did so much earlier on in the mountain. So that was the first mountain I ever climbed. And but I didn't. Backstepping. When we were in Nepal, I remember getting to base camp. And I looked up and I was like, there's no way I could ever do that, ever.
Wow.
And because it was hard just to get to base camp.
Yeah. How long does it take to get to base camp?
I think usually they allow about sort of 10 days, something like that, to acclimatize slowly. And, it's a very spiritual, beautiful journey to base camp. Amazing. And we went over the Chola Pass, and it's like walking on the moon. And it's incredible, but it's hard. And I felt like shit at base camp. Altitude is not something you just, I think 3/4 of the world, I don't know the stats, but a lot of people cannot physically go above 16,000 feet.
And you need, after a certain altitude, you need to have oxygen with you. Is that correct?
Yes. If you haven't trained yourself. So I went, I went on to oxygen at Camp 3.
Okay. Interesting. So what, maybe...
Sorry, can I just butt in 1 second?
Yeah, definitely.
So Kip and I break up.
Okay.
And I think because your podcast is about mindset. So now here I am, I've given up my job, I've moved to another country, and my relationship's going pear-shaped, and I don't know what to do. So I decided to take a very different route, which has very much been about how I've handled coping mechanisms of how I've handled situations in my life. And I just remember booking 3 mountains to go and climb in Bolivia.
Oh, wow.
And I just showed up in Bolivia with my guide from Aconcagua and went on my own.
Completely on your own.
And sod's law, and I was really upset, and I was in it, but I was like, I'm gonna get over this pain through physical, adversity, just push myself to my limits. And then I was at the camp, I was at Huayna Potosi base camp, and there was a group from Sun Valley who knew Kip, lived right next door to me. So I'm like,
oh no.
But anyway,
trying to get away.
But it was an amazing experience. I met these Danish girls, and we did Illimani, Huayna Potosi, and Pequeño Apalmayu. And I remember we just had like this dinner party in La Paz, and it was all the people I'd met climbing. And it was very liberating. And so that was how I coped with grief and pain, and just I was kind of lost. So I spent a lot of time in South America.
How do you think that pushing yourself physically helped you? Is it
because you're busy in sometimes sort of life-threatening, very cold, extreme weather conditions. It's physically really challenging. So you can go over stuff in your head, but you've got another goal.
You have to be really present, I imagine.
Yeah, so it's just, for me, it's a really good coping mechanism of when I'm dealing with something in my life, is to really apply myself physically. That was my way, instead of therapy, is just dealing with it.
Interesting.
Through that.
So you're going through this breakup, but you've really gotten into climbing at this point, maybe getting more confident. How did it go from that to
Everest.
then getting invited to Everest?
So, I spent this time in South America, and I did, the Bolivia, I did Ecuador, I rode horses across Ecuador with some girlfriends. I went to Argentina, and then I decided I'd go back to London and I was going to do an adventure travel TV show. So you've got to remember, this is like 2003. So adventure travel wasn't really taking off back then. So I went with another girl, and we were going to do this adventure travel, but tell the history through sport and experiences of a place, and do a different side from, normal sights and sounds. And we went to the BBC, and they just basically hated us.
Oh, no.
They told us to go. They said, go away and come back when you've done something with your life, kind of thing.
Wow.
So I then got the opportunity by chance. My mum was at a Hong Kong bank drinks and went up to talk to Andronico Luksic, who was chairman of Banco de Chile. And Dad had said that he liked to climb mountains. So she's like, just, casually, like, my daughter likes to climb too. And he, before asking what had actually climbed, he's like, oh, would she like to come on a Chilean 204 Everest expedition? Mum's like, oh, yeah, I think she'd really like that, thanks.
Yeah.
So she wakes me up the next morning and tells me this. And she's like, darling, I've arranged for you to climb Everest. I'm like, what, where, what? Yeah.
Right.
And I thought about it, and I'm like, you know what? Yes, that's an unbelievable opportunity. And that's one of my mantras. You've got to take every opportunity that comes your way in life. So I phone him up, and poor Andronico's now backpedaling. Like, I don't want this loser girl coming on my trip. So he's like, you've got to come to Ecuador, and we're going to meet the Chilean team, and we're going to climb Cotopaxi and Chimborazo back to back. So I'm like, okay. So I thought it was quite brave. I'm 33 years old, and I'm now flying off to Ecuador to meet a whole load of strangers.
Definitely.
And I'd gone from Saint-Tropez, where I've been hitting the nightlife and stuff, and training really hard in the day. So I land in.
You were training in Saint-Tropez?
I was running in the heat of the day. Everyone would be like sleeping in, and I'd be up running this mountain.
That's not where I'd expect someone to be training.
But
cool.
So I show up, and I come down with bronchitis.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my God. And I knew that I had to climb these 2 peaks, otherwise he's not going to let me on the team. So I remember like hiding my antibiotics, and I coughed and coughed and coughed my way to the summit and scarred my lungs. But anyway, I made it, and I got formally invited on the Chilean team. And I don't think they were overjoyed initially, but anyway, I proved myself, and I knew I just had to keep up and work hard.
I'd love to zoom in on the moment where, so your mom's kind of come and told you have this opportunity, and you easily could have just said like, oh, that's too much for me, or dismissed it. But you decided to call them up and say you wanted to join. I think you were talking about opportunity. A lot of people have opportunities that come up, but start to have fear of failure, or fear of not being good enough, or am I getting myself in too deep? How did you kind of get past any of that internal dialogue?
So I think the biggest thing that we're doing wrong in our lives is not allowing ourselves to fail. Failure, you can't be afraid of failure. And I failed a lot in my youth. I mean, I failed major exams. So I had to deal with failure at a young age. And I think that's really important, to learn and experience failure and to pick yourself up and move off on another path.
Yeah.
So I didn't fear failure, and it was this amazing opportunity. And I always say to everyone, you must take every opportunity. If you fail, who cares? Like, just do it. And so I was so laser focused. I mean, like poor Andronico, he'll regret having ever said that to my mom. But I didn't fear failure, and I wanted to give it everything I got.
Amazing. And so you get on the plane, you land in Ecuador, and there are these 5 Chilean men you've never met before, and they are probably wondering, who's this blonde who's coming with us now?
Oh, yeah.
What was that interaction when you first met them?
Yeah, I mean, they really didn't want me to come, I don't think. But they were lovely, really amazing people, and I adore them all to this day. They were patient. I was called Gringa. Like, let the Gringa do this. Let the Gringa take the extra saucepan. Gringa, you go first over this crevasse.
Not letting you have it easy at all.
But no, I mean, I completely credit them for getting me Everest ready. And, we had some really tough training climbs down in Chile. And for some reason, the altitude feels much harder down in South America. So one of the climbs, we were breaking trail up to here. Another, our campsite blew away. So I had
breaking trail meaning
the snow's up to here,
up to your stomach.
I mean, I don't know if you've even tried to do that, but
no.
I could do like 2 footsteps. I mean, it is so much easier once there's a path. It's physically so exhausting. I mean, I couldn't even eat at night. I was so tired.
Was there something that they taught you during that training that really
this is
stuck
the
with you?
whole grit. I started getting it on the Maclehose, putting yourself out there, coming out of your comfort zone and experiencing pain.
Definitely.
And, another sort of small thing is when you're absolutely exhausted and you think you're going to die, literally you think you've got nothing left, you always have 20 to 40% left in the tank when you think you're exhausted. So it's mentally getting yourself over that obstacle.
You also had another setback in preparing for Everest when you were in Ecuador and started to experience some health issues and actually ended up finding out you had a tumor in your uterus. Could you talk about what that was like, and a huge emotional load, I imagine, on top of preparing for Everest? What was that experience like?
Yeah, no, it was completely, I was at the fittest I could have ever been. I was having a few issues which had actually been sort of pushed away by the doctor in England, and I'm now down in Chile, and I'm experiencing, just minor weird things going on. So I go and get checked, and they find this tumor in my uterus, and they do all the dye tests, which are actually extremely painful, and they take it off for sampling. And I remember, I think I was so laser focused on Everest. This was like an annoying obstacle. And I remember saying to Andronico, if it comes back malignant, please still let me climb Everest.
Wow.
And he said, you have to ask your parents. I'm like, I'm 33 years old.
Funny.
But I was, one of the lucky ones, touch wood. And so I used it as an opportunity to raise a lot of awareness for women about ovarian cancer and how it can happen to anyone, no matter how fit. And I raised money for the Eve Appeal, which specializes in the prevention of ovarian cancer. And it really, really... It helps when you're undergoing a challenge like Everest to have a deeper meaning, like you're doing it for other people, and that when you're going through those really dark moments, that you have a reason to push through. That, I knew that I could get £1 million on the Everest climb. So really, I would do whatever it takes to get that money so that could help other people, look out for the signs and create awareness for ovarian cancer.
I believe 1.8 million pounds
that
you
was
raised
the
for
total.
them. Yeah, it's amazing how you turned that negative, scary situation ahead of the climb into something really positive on your climb.
Well, I was happy to just try and get, in my own little way, get the word out there and make people vigilant and check.
Definitely. Okay, so let's jump into Everest. So you arrive at Everest now with the Chilean team, and you had mentioned previously you were there and never thought you could get past base camp. So what was it like showing up, and this time you knew you were headed to the summit?
Well, I was showing up this time with a laser focus of I wanted to get to the summit. And so everyone was sick trekking in. We trekked in, we came back over the Chola Pass. We took 2 weeks trekking in. And then, Everest is such a daunting mountain. I remember, I think in today's world, it would be a panic attack the first time I went into the Khumbu Icefall because of for me, that was the hardest part of the mountain, because you're going over these crevasses you look in and you can't see a bottom. And so that's my fear of heights. You're on this rickety little ladder that's anchored by, an ice screw, which melts as the day gets on. So you never know if you actually fall, is that ladder going to hold? So that to me was the hardest part. So I remember going across the ladder, and combined with the altitude, I found it hard to breathe. So I was seriously panicky. But, you get used to it. You go over, I went on my knees because my crampons didn't fit between the rungs. My knees had open wounds on my knees. But I don't care. Anyone can laugh at me. I got to the other side and it got me across. So whatever it took, I used that, because, then from then on, there wasn't so much vertical exposure.
And so could you talk us through, you're going over, so the Khumbu Ice Fall, it's a rickety aluminum ladder over a huge crevasse, and you're on it, you're afraid of heights. What are you telling yourself as you're crossing?
Well, firstly, I'm shaking. Like the whole ladder, I am literally on it like this. And I was just like, it's not going to happen to me. I was like, imagine, it's not going to happen to me. Just get to the other side. I mean, you literally had to isolate any thoughts of falling off the cliffs and just look at the other side and just aim there. Wow. And so it really is about controlling your mind. You have to control it like a vice, so that all those scary, thoughts of disasters are not coming into your mind at that present time.
Because they say that, like, when you tell yourself not to think about something, it's impossible. You immediately think about it.
Yeah.
So did you have kind of a fixation point that you
the other side?
Yeah.
My teammate, the other side, and it was just, don't even think, just get to the other side. Like, you have to control your mind.
Yeah.
And it is possible.
Yeah.
Whether people achieve that through a meditation or not, I just looked at the other side and I just went for it.
Yeah. Amazing. And what was a typical day like on Everest? How long are you walking for? How much gear are you carrying? What are the camps like? Curious if you could paint a picture of what that journey's like.
We were there for 6-7 weeks at base camp. So you've got to remember, you're living at 17,500 feet. So, if you have a cut on your hand, it won't heal. I mean, it's a very harsh environment. We all had the Khumbu cough, where you coughed. I mean, one of my girlfriends who climbed Everest a year after me coughed so much she broke 2 ribs. So just to give you an idea of how dry and arid, the air is up there. So when we were climbing, it was usually, you got quicker as it went on. But it started off like a 8-hour day, and you go, I mean, just in a nutshell, you go base camp, camp 1, camp 1 back down, base camp, camp 1, sleep at camp 1 down, base camp, camp 1, camp 2, touch camp 2 down, base camp, camp 2, sleep at camp 2, touch camp 3 down. So you're up and down the whole time.
Interesting. I didn't realize you went back down. So it's
because you're getting your body used to the diminishing levels of oxygen.
Interesting.
So then we went all the way down, which was the most demoralizing part, down to 14,000 feet before our summit push. And then we come back up and then we go for the summit. And you've got to get into a rhythm, and I think it's quite important that you don't go anaerobic when you're climbing, because then you're out of breath. So the moment you're panting, it's not good. So you've got to keep your breathing kind of regulated, and you get used to it. And let me obviously mention the Sherpas are the unsung heroes of the mountain. We had an amazing group with us, and I mean, for most climbers, Everest is not achievable without them. They help ferry the loads to the camps, and so they really are the unsung heroes of the mountain, and they deserve every bit of respect from everyone. I mean, they're phenomenal. Yeah, so they do. So we carry, much heavier packs on Denali and Aconcagua and Vincent than Everest.
Okay, because they help you.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, it's not nothing, but it's better.
Yeah. And what was the most mentally and physically taxing part of Everest for you?
Probably our summit day. We had a few dramas that went on summit day. Our summit day was 30. My summit day was 30 hours because we were the first team up, so breaking trail. So it was a very, very slow climbing because we're going through snow like this, and we passing body on the balcony is not. I mean, seeing other people's bodies is not the best thing to see. And also, actually, about 50 of us were meant to go on our summit day, and really high winds were taking place that day, and we had enough rope to rope up alpine style. So a lot of people turned back. So actually, there was only our team, which was 5 climbers, 5 Sherpa, 10 of us, and there was Kenton Cool, who's my great friend who's done Everest now, I think 17 times or something, and his client. So that was, but we were, I think I was 14 hours to the summit, 2 hours on the summit, and then I came down in 3 hours, but my team came down in 13. We had all sorts of dramas on summit day.
So the last kind of challenge of Everest, I believe, is the Hillary Step. What was it like navigating that last stretch?
So you're going, so for me, the hard part, you're going from the south summit to the Hillary Step, and you're going along this, you can't really see it. It looks like a really narrow, snowy path. And I put my ice axe through, and it kind of went like that. And I'm like, big air underneath. Wow. So, even though it's not like the ice fall with the sheer drop, you know that there's drops. So if you fall, you're off. So, and again, you look at the Hillary step, it's quite daunting because there's just loads of old ropes. So I said to, one of my guides, I'm like, well, which one do I hold on to? And he's like, I don't know what will hold, grab a few. So I took this, because you go out and over the exposure and then you go up the Hillary step. So I was super focused. It was like I was in another mind frame. I wanted to get to the summit.
And what was it like when you reached the top of Everest?
So the moment I was over the Hillary step, I knew I was going to do it. So I was sobbing into my oxygen mask the whole way up. I had about a 40-minute ridge, like you go along the knife ridge. So I was sobbing. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make my dad so proud. So I get to the top. And it's amazing. You can see the curvature of the earth. It's, people often ask, it's probably about the size of here with prayer flags. And so I sat and waited for the team, and then we all they were all phoning Chile, and I was like, but it's only half the climb, we haven't got down. Right. And I didn't want to phone anyone. I was just sitting there, and then I heard like high winds coming, get off, because we blew past, we were meant to turn around at 12, and I reached the summit at 12 and left at 2. So
you had to wait for the winds to die down?
No, the winds were coming. So I wanted to get off fast. Yeah, so I came down with Lakpa, Rita Sherpa and myself. And I said to the others, I'm going. And they were still like phoning Chile. I'm like, I'm off. And I went down in 3 hours, almost faster than the skier. We were running. Wow. I was on a short rope and ran.
From summit all the way down to the bottom in 3 hours?
Yeah.
Wow.
Running.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And one last piece on Everest. I believe it was on Everest you wrote something on your tent during your journey. Do you remember what that was?
I do. And now I'm going to have a bloody mind blank. I wrote it in lipstick on my tent. It was that expression, only those who are not afraid to push will ever see how far they can go.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I love that.
That was your motivating factor?
Always. I wrote it on every tent in lipstick.
In lipstick?
In lip pencil. Yeah.
I love that. Those are great words. And yeah, you definitely demonstrated that. So you summit Everest, come back down safely. What happens when you come down? Do you fly back to London, you sleep for 2 weeks, have a big party? What happened?
I went to Phuket to meet my girlfriends who had all come to meet me. And I remember, you forget, you're coming out, it's like you come out of a war zone. All the top layer of my lips had burnt off. Wow. And I remember going for Thai chicken green curry. And I was like, ow, I had to run out the restaurant because it was burning.
Oh, no.
But then I had what's known as post-Everest depression, the removal. I'm a very goal-orientated person. So I like to live my life, even now, goals, to work towards. And no matter how small. So I had this big, my whole life had been Everest. And now suddenly it's done, what next? So I saw no woman had climbed the 7 summits in under a year. And then I was like, right, that's my next goal. I'm going to raise the money, continue doing stuff for the Eve Appeal. And do the 7 summits in under a year.
Interesting. And so, because most people, I imagine, to attempt that, it takes tons of planning ahead of time. You're suddenly doing this on the fly. What was the next step? Because now you had to fundraise and do all the logistics.
So doing it on the fly was the hardest part. In hindsight, I wish I'd gone to Denali straight away, but you had to get permits, and I was kind of still recovering from having done Everest. And if I'd gone to Denali straight away, I'd have done the whole thing in 6 months. Wow. Hindsight's a glorious thing. So I didn't. So I went to London and raised the money, and that's almost harder than the climbs. I remember Red Bull came back and said, what you're doing is not extreme enough for us to consider sponsoring. I contacted everybody, and then I got a break. I got some, Paul Tudor-Jones, very kindly, his company came in. I never met him, but his company came in. I got a bit from Merrill Lynch. Summit Hotels came in to provide. Lian Fung from Hong Kong, from my hometown, came in. Amazing. So gradually got some sponsors together to pay for the rest.
Definitely.
Antarctica being the most expensive.
Oh, interesting. And you also, when you did Everest, you were a guest with the Chilean team. So now were you putting the team together?
Yes.
Getting the gear together? Were you discovering all of that for the first time?
No, so it was that now I mean, I need to be guided. I mean, listen, there are some amazing mountaineers in this town. I mean, I'm a very good person, but I want someone to double check my harness and to just to guide me. I'm always the number 2 person on the rope. So I went with Guy Cotter and Adventure Consultants, and I wanted to make sure that I was with people that were married and had kids that wanted to come back, that weren't going to put me in any kind of danger. So actually, he was amazing. So he did those logistics. I did the fundraising logistics, put together, I had it filmed, probably others, no one would have believed I'd done it. And so I had, between him and Luis Benitez, they took me on the rest.
Amazing. Because I think when people set goals, those kind of logistical challenges can kind of put you down or make you unsure if you want to proceed, just because it's all new and unknown and that kind of like 0 to 1 step. So you must have definitely learned a lot during all of that time.
One of my sort of 5 life lessons that kind of the Navy SEALs use as well, prior preparation and planning prevents piss poor performance. That's always, so, that's very important logistically. And I learned it from the Maclehose, where we had a very, very, so many lessons came from that ultra race. So everything had to be meticulously planned.
Amazing. So where you said you wanted to go to Denali, but you couldn't because of permits. So where did you head next?
So raised the money, did a few things in London. So then I went to Elbrus in Russia, Kilimanjaro, down to Australia, Kosciuszko. And then I went so I had kind of friends and other people on those climbs. I always had a guide so that if they couldn't make the summit, I could still go. And it was quite funny in Russia. The guide was so busy on vodka, he was sort of lying unconscious. So luckily, we all went with the other guide, and he just met us at the end.
Wow.
But then when I went to go to Vincent in Antarctica and Aconcagua, which I was doing back to back, it was just me and Luis Benitez and a cameraman.
You had summited Everest, so were you more confident going into those, or how did you feel?
I mean, yes, I was more confident, but with mountains, it's so funny. We were sort of on Kosciuszko, which is, it's not that high. We were sort of just laughing and being silly. But actually, we get to the top, and there was this crazy wind, and we were all like cowering behind rocks. So my point is, you've got to respect every mountain. It doesn't matter. They all deserve respect, because it's the elements that can come in out of nowhere and change, your safety factor
definitely
straight away.
And so I think that ties in. The next mountain you then went to, Vincent Massif in Antarctica, known as the most remote, a logistical nightmare, was the most expensive for you. So what was that like, going to Antarctica and doing that summit?
So that I went with pressure, because I couldn't afford, in the budget I'd raised, to go again. So I kind of knew that I had to climb that. We had some Antarctica weather is crazy down there. So it's some very strong winds and stuff. So I was sort of, that I kind of felt pressure. And it's never really good to climb with pressure, because I think it can put the safety of the team at risk. I probably was quite annoying. My guide's like, calm down. But it's 24-hour daylight, which I love, because you can climb whenever. And so eventually we got our window, and it really was probably one of the most special places. I remember having summited and sitting there with a beer, waiting for the plane to fly us back to where we got the big plane on the glacier. And I know it was just one of those moments in time where you want to freeze the clock. It's just beautiful and really amazing.
I imagine such few people go because of how remote it is.
Well, then, yes, it was not that many people. We went in a Russian Illusion jet, which was just unbelievable. I mean, military aircraft. We had, we had cars down the plane. We had the loos coming back on the plane. And then I was rushing to Aconcagua. And this is where I made some mistakes, because this is where I was a bit overconfident. So I planned we'd go in by mule. We ride in for 3 days, and then we go base camp, camp 1, camp 2, summit out. And anyway, so we have mules that dropped off cliffs, and these sure-footed animals falling off the cliff. I mean, I was like starting to get, freaked out, I was crying. All our gear's now in the river. Luckily, they made it. So we get to base camp. I'm like, okay, we've got mules. Now my cameraman gets altitude sickness. I'm like, ooh. Then my other guide had to go home for Christmas. And then I get to camp 1. And altitude is something that you kind of need to train for. And Vincent Massif's only 16,500 feet. Now I'm going to 23. So I get rushing up to Camp 1 and literally my lips are blue. And they're like, we're turning you around. I'm like, no, I refuse. They're like, you cannot climb. You're so oxygen depleted. So I took a rest day and then went for the summit and collapsed on the summit. Like, that's the one time I thought, I don't think I have any energy. I don't have that 20% left at all.
Really at zero now. So what happened at that point?
Well, I lay there for about maybe an hour, and then I got 3 goo shots down me, and then managed to get down onto my own power. But what was weird, and it's so gross, I'm sorry to gross you out, but my feet had frozen in my boot, and I knew it wasn't comfortable, but I'd lost contact with them. So when I finally got my foot out, my whole nail had moved. And if you touched it, like juice would fly across the room. It was so disgusting. But all that mattered was that that was 6 of the 7 summits. So I'd done it. Yeah. And come out alive. So
you said you went in perhaps overconfident. Then that was because you had done it before and thought this will be easy.
And I'm now like, I was Miss Everest. So, I mean, it immediately humbles you because I was like literally on the summit thinking, how could I ever have gone in confident?
So while confidence is really important, overconfidence can be detrimental.
Is terrible, yes.
Yeah. And you also talked about in a previous interview, doctors actually say that it takes the human body 6 months to recover from Everest. And then now you're 6 months later on your 6th mountain on a 6th different continent. So it seems like throughout this, doctors have been telling you physical limitations were coming up, but you kind of never thought about listening to them, or?
Luckily, I hadn't even heard that statement before. Okay. And I was like, you just get in the zone. I was so AAA. I'm goal orientated, and I felt good, and I was determined and driven.
When you say AAA, what does that mean?
Oh, I mean, like, just super disciplined, and I was on this like very just exercise, achieving goals path. It helps when you're not, you have a kid or married or whatever.
Definitely.
It's all about you and your mojo. Yeah. And so I was probably selfish.
But so throughout this, you weren't in a relationship. Were you in touch with friends at that point, or your family, or had to be totally focused on yourself?
Yeah, I mean, those days it was just that little Nokia phone. I mean, please, can we bring all that era back?
Yeah.
I would speak to my mum on the sat phone, and it's so funny. She'd be like, I'd be on Everest. She'd be like, now don't forget your gloves, darling. I'm like, okay, Mum, I won't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was in touch. But what's interesting, and for I had this whole year of enriching experience. I'd never been to Russia, Africa, Australia, all different cultures, different experiences. And then you finish, and then you go back to London and you just slot right back in. But you have had this amazing experience. Your friends haven't, they're just the same. Yeah. So never be afraid to take a year out and do stuff, or to achieve goals.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because it can be scary sometimes to leave your norm. But
get out of your comfort zone. That's where you learn and do. You get so much more out of it.
Definitely. So the final climb of the 7 is Denali in Alaska. How did you feel beginning Denali and knowing it was the last summit you had to complete?
Yeah, I mean, it was tougher. We went at the end of April, so it's pretty cold. Beautiful. And very, very icy, I remember, and very heavy packs. And then, so we get to our high camp. We've had to, you have to build an ice wall at high camp. And then they said, okay, we're going for our summit push today. And the weather came in, and I'm now front pointing on the side of this hill in the cloud.
What's
and
front pointing?
It's like where I'm on the side of it with my ice axe on the side, going sideways.
Okay.
Like with kicking your crampons into the wall. And I'm like, this really doesn't feel right. Nothing is feeling right about this. And we're 6 hours into our climb. And I said, I need to go back.
What didn't feel right? Just felt...
Everything felt wrong. I was front pointing. We didn't know where we were going.
Okay.
So we go back to camp. And so I've had this 6-hour day. We're back in camp. I'm like, that's it. That's my record done.
Because I imagine you have to really listen to your intuition in the mountains.
Just didn't feel comfortable. Yeah. And I was like, I don't want to die. World records, not, So went back to camp. And then the next day was a bluebird day, and the guide was like, do you want to do it? Are you up to it? And I'm like, yeah. So it was a really long, hard summit day. And this is where we met these 2 brothers, so it's 8 o'clock at night, and we were going for the summit. And no, we had summited. So we had summited, and which was amazing. I mean, it was hard, especially having done that big exertion the day before. And we were down at, just at the base of the final summit push, and we met these two brothers, and they were going up. So we were on our way down at 8 p.m. They were still going up. I remember thinking, that's weird. And they didn't have guides. It was just the two of them. And I was like, who am I to judge? I had a guide and a cameraman with me. So chatted, went back to high camp, and woke up the next morning, and they were dead next to our camp.
Wow.
So that really freaked me out.
Yeah.
And and talking about mindset, because I was so traumatized by what had happened to them and their bodies, when we're climbing back down on the ridge, I was so traumatized that I was overthinking. I could hardly, you instead of just walking like you would, I was all over the place.
Like overthinking every step.
Overthinking every step.
Interesting, yeah. That must have been, it's a very stark contrast from you've reached your goal of the 7 summits in 1 year, and then the next day to find 2 bodies of people you had met. How did that make you feel, or maybe change your perspective of climbing or your achievement?
Well, it really made the whole record feel like nothing. I mean, because it's like, oh my God, these people have lost their lives.
Yeah.
And it just showed, the importance of being careful in the mountains, never taking anything for granted. I'd just done so many mountains back to back, so I kind of felt lucky. So that's when once I finished, I took a huge break.
Understandably, for sure.
It's so funny, like walking out from summit day we walked all the way out. I mean, I was hallucinating. I was seeing monkeys in the clouds.
Wow.
And dragons. I was that exhausted.
Wow. And do you think that whole experience, especially with how Denali ended, kind of that appreciation for life and seize every day and every moment, is that really something you learned from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I read a statistic, we have control over 80% of our life, 20% is circumstantial. So, that really showed the circumstantial going wrong.
Yeah.
So, I was like, that's it. I've had it lucky, on the mountains, And I remember Chris Bonington giving a talk, and there was a picture of him and about 10 climbers. He said, I'm the only one here today. So I was very much aware of, that was enough for me.
So what happened when you finished your goal? Did you have that same feeling after Everest of a goal like being gone and looking for something new, or what was your feeling after you'd completed it?
Yeah, but it all happened so quickly because Prince Albert of Monaco's office contacted my dad's office and said, would she be interested in coming to the North Pole on this expedition? And my dad didn't even ask me. He's like, she'd love that. And actually then he's like looking, he's like, no woman's climbed K2 and survived. I'm like, thanks, Dad. Like, I don't
saying you should go.
Yeah. I'm like, do you not like me? So anyway, so then I flew out to Monaco and met with Prince Albert, and his team was in conjunction with WWF, and I agreed to go with him.
So the adventure has continued and kind of snowballed from there. Yeah. Amazing. And I know that another adventure that you've had that we haven't touched on yet is you also have a daughter, Isabella, who I believe is 16 now. Where did Isabella fit into all of this, into your life of adventure? And how has that journey of motherhood been?
So just after the North Pole, I was dating. I got engaged to someone, and I was very soon pregnant with Isabella, and unfortunately our relationship didn't survive. The cracks were showing already. So I left when I was 4 months pregnant. A very, very difficult decision to take. I was heartbroken. I was pregnant. I was losing my fiance. And it was a very controversial decision for my family. Like, my dad's very traditional. And so, sadly, it all went wrong. So I had Izzy in London. And, for the first 9 years before I met my husband, Ken, I raised Isabella myself. So, and that was a whole different challenge.
A whole new journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now that you have a daughter, how does that change your perspective on the risks you take? Do you still do such death-defying climbs, or do you feel that that's now behind you?
You know what was really hard is when I had Izzy, the longest time I'd been in one place was Everest Base Camp. And sort of these challenges in climbing and this, exerting yourself physically was so much an integral part of me. So now I had someone else that I had to put first. So I didn't really want to put myself, I couldn't just say, nanny or my mum, look after her, I'm going for 2 months climbing. Right. So I had to, and really be there for her. So the only thing I did after Isabella was I did 2 desert races, which was 250K across. I did Sahara and Namibia with a team of 2 of my great girlfriends. And that was another hard feat, but it was great. I got the same feeling, and I felt like I wasn't doing anything crazy, that I would still be there for Isabella, because, I was so selfish with my time before, and now I had to put somebody else first.
Definitely. And now at this point, you've definitely proven yourself. So what keeps you pushing yourself, I guess, to continue to chase these adventures?
Well, now I've thrown myself into the Laurea Sport for Good Foundation. So I take 100 people on challenges to raise money, using the power of sport to give back. And it's great because we put this really interesting group of people together, and everyone's out of their comfort zones, and it's a team building experience. So I focused a lot on that, giving other people the opportunity to come out of their comfort zone and to meet a great network of people and to give back. So I think it's my time. I love anything around sport, and I keep myself at a level of fitness where if I did get asked to do something, it wouldn't take long to get into shape to do it. And as I said, I'm very goal-orientated in how I think it's really important for people to be disciplined, to have goals. And I will just say, if you just exercise a little bit, it gives you those endorphins that make you far more focused and far more productive. So, like for kids, it's the importance of getting that exercise in off the phones and just living the old-fashioned way.
With Isabella, so it sounds like exercise, being active, being healthy is something you're instilling in her as you raise her.
Well, you'll realize when you get to have kids, you can control them a little bit when they're younger, like sure. What they eat and what their exercise. It's hard, much harder to try and tell a 16-year-old what to do. I can, I can take the horse to water. I can't make it drink. So, my main thing is that she knows that she's had this upbringing. She knows what's good for her, and she has to make her own path. I can only advise, but I have a lot of experience to advise, but they don't like to hear it.
Would you want Isabella to follow in your footsteps and do some of these climbs herself one day?
Well, I think she's far cleverer and she has far more potential than I had, and all I hope for her, I think mountaineering is really busy right now. I mean, I look at those lines on Everest, and it's not. I'm so glad I climbed when I did. I would like her to forge her own path. She's got so much talent, and when you're a teen, you don't really know how to channel it. Yeah. I just hope she can use her talents to her own advantage, be happy, and what more can you ask for your kid, If she went into climbing, I'm not going with her.
I guess so, as long as she's pushing herself, like that quote you mentioned.
Yeah, taking every opportunity, and, when you've been given a lot, like, just give, make the most of it, take every opportunity and give back.
Definitely. Amazing. A few closing questions with what you've learned and kind of the advice you give. So first, what do you think climbing the 7 summits taught you, or what was the biggest gift that it gave you?
I think the biggest gift was just experiencing all the different cultures, the countries, the people that you met along the way. So it's really experiences. You can't buy experience. So I really value that, and just how organized and prepared I was, that it forced me to be like that.
And what do you think it taught you?
Well, I think I learned humility just from, going in overconfident and getting crushed. And I think I learned a lot how to get on with people better in your team. And it taught me to believe in myself and my ability to get things done. And at the end of the day, that's what creates the confidence that, I always think, there's all these women that fuss about like designer clothes and looking right, and I don't give a shit. I'll walk into anywhere in a pair of jeans, and at the end of the day, I've got a really good story to tell. And I think, so I'm trying to tell Isabella, it's not about physical appearances. It's about what you can talk to people about and be interesting and that kind of thing. So I have a good story to tell.
Definitely. So in pushing yourself, getting out of your comfort zone, even if you fail, you always have that confidence and a story that you can tell coming out.
Oh yeah, and definitely never ever be scared to fail, because failure is just it's a lesson. It's just something that you learn, and you can just do something else. So that's the key. And I really think kids today are not learning to fail. And I think that's a big part. When they suddenly get to have a job, they're like, they can't take the stresses of what, I learned to 8 when I was failing stuff, and had my exam results read out in front of the whole class.
Right.
Everyone did. You didn't want to be last. They read everyone out.
And now you've gone through this journey. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Probably to have worked harder in school. And I'm very happy with what I've done. I've taken, I think, as many opportunities. I'd be more I wouldn't have smoked in my teens, and I would have worked harder in school.
Good message to give.
Look after your body.
Yeah. Anything to your younger self who's going through the 7 summits? Any advice you would have given?
Just don't give up. Listen to listen to your gut.
Yeah.
The summit will always be there. Like, if there's anything that doesn't feel right, come back and do it again. Like, you can take risks, but don't do anything stupid. I mean, there's that saying, the mountain will always be there.
Interesting. Yeah. It can be hard to listen to your gut.
It is, especially this is the problem. When records are at stake, people aren't, they're just going for the record. You've got to know when something doesn't feel right, and don't put yourself into crazy risks. You're already taking a risk.
Right. And for anyone who's trying to do something that's never been done before, what advice would you give them?
Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something. I mean, I got literally laughed out of town. It was like, you're never going to get above base camp. No one believed. I mean, even when I met Edmund Hillary, who's a hero, he's like, so how was base camp? I went a bit higher, actually.
Yeah, just a little higher.
Yeah, so don't let anyone tell you can't do something. Just always be prepared to try and fail.
Yeah.
Because, and just be driven and disciplined.
It's that. Like that saying, it's only crazy until it's done.
Yeah, exactly.
And you definitely did that. And finally, what is the main thing you would want others to take away from your story and apply to their own life when it comes to their mindset?
Well, I think the most important thing is you are in charge of your own mindset. So have a goal. And set yourself a goal and focus on that goal, and don't let anyone tell you, as I said, that you can't achieve it, because you can, even if you fail, you could always surprise yourself. And I think to have a goal is very important. And the only other message: look after your body, like eat healthily, and
get off your phone.
and I think get off your phone, and exercise really does give you some good endorphins that make you more productive and more energetic. Definitely. When you're sitting in front of the TV, it's like you feel lethargic. Like, if you exercise, you want to do more.
Yeah, and that, as you've seen, it builds on top of each other, and there's a snowball effect. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I think that's a great place to end. I again, as I mentioned, it's been a pleasure getting to know you as I've grown up, and you've always been a huge inspiration to me, and I know to many others. So it's been fantastic to get to share your story.
No, it was great fun. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Listening to my story.
This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. For more episodes, search for the Mind X Frame podcast where you stream your podcasts, or visit @MindXFrame Podcast on Instagram. See you next time.